The story of the crucifixion in Mark has two levels of narrative drama happening, a lower level and a higher level. And I mean this quite literally. The lower level includes all those standing on the ground. The higher level are those on crosses. The upper level is all about defeat, shame, and suffering. The lower level is all about sarcasm, cruelty, and banality. Those on the banal lower level are unaware of what is happening on the upper level. Banality is an interesting word. To be banal is to be dull, boring, trite, superficial, to be not interesting, not fresh, not new. And it's strange, but evil is often quite banal. I read a book many years ago. It was a collection of diary entries made by Nazis working in death camps. I couldn't read it for very long. I could only get a couple pages in. It was simply too disturbing. But the banality of the whole thing just is exactly what made it disturbing. I remember, I'm making this up a little bit, but this captures the feel of one sample diary entry. I went to the store, bought eggs for Martha, played soccer with the kids, read a book for a few hours, killed 20 Jews, watched a movie in the canteen, and went to bed. Evil is not accompanied with some dark philosophy or sinister spirituality. It's rather banal, it's trite. It's part of a regular, boring day. And evil often hides under the cover of boredom and routine. The people gathered around the cross on the lower level were taken up in the banality of the moment. Mockery is an important element of the dark ritual associated with public executions like crucifixions. So the people mocked. But there was no real creativity involved. There was no novelty. There was no real imagination. Mostly they just repeated stuff they'd heard, what everyone else was saying. You saved others, save yourself, come down from the cross. He can't even save himself, over and over and over. Those on the ground, on the lower level, were mocking. Again, like one does at a crucifixion. Now, there were two others with Jesus who were crucified with him as well. In Luke's gospel, one of them defends Jesus. But in Mark's gospel, they both mock him. And this has always struck me as odd. They're both facing death. Why would they spend their last moments on earth mocking someone else who was sharing the same fate? They shared the same upper level perspective of shame and suffering. Perhaps they really just wanted to be back on the lower level. It was kind of a self-denial. They just wanted to be somewhere other than where they were, perhaps. Or perhaps they felt that if they mocked somebody else, they would be spared mocking at least. They would be part of the group that was mocking, and mockers like to work in groups often. But for whatever reason, these victims of imperial injustice turn against another victim of imperial justice. Then darkness comes over the land, and Jesus says, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is one of the most heartbreaking moments in human history, human literature. Certainly, it's a tragic moment of climax in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus uses Psalm 22 to give voice to the desolation happening on this upper level. God did not forsake Jesus. God is ever faithful, especially in times of darkness. And yet, Jesus gives voice to his experience in the moment, which is of forsakenness. I believe more is going on than just that, though. I believe Jesus is entering in solidarity with the whole human race and giving voice to the experience of desolation that all in history have experienced, who have faced the darkness of death without comfort, without consolation. It's a heartbreaking little imagination that I have. I always imagine, and I don't, this is a fictional person, but it's also a real person. I imagine this young child who has to face a Nazi gas chamber alone because her parents have been killed or died on the way to the camp. There's no one there for her. Terror and confusion. She has no explanation of why she is where she is right then. Why have you forsaken us? Excuse me. This gives voice to the experience of human desolation throughout history. I remember these stories because I think it's one of our tasks to remember the victims of senseless violence, to remember those who have experienced this sort of desolation, this experience of forsakenness. And I believe it's also our responsibility to affirm for them what they could not affirm for themselves, that God is with them. Hope is a wonderful treasure, but sometimes we hold on to it for ourselves. I believe one of our callings is to use our hope as we imagine and think about the world. Have hope for those who have lost hope. The death of Jesus was, for Jesus, in his perspective, a forsaken moment devoid of rhyme and reason. And yet, we stake our lives on this moment as the most important event in all of human history as Christians. What was desolation for Jesus is consolation for us. Those on the lower level had mocked Jesus, saying he had saved others, but he can't save himself. But we know that it's exactly in not saving himself that he saves others. Jesus' cry of dereliction captures the suffering of the whole human race. It captures all the depression, despondency, anxiety, despair that we know as a species. So what is going on in this upper level story is so dense with meaning and emotion, it's unbearable. It would crush us. It's so much. It's so intense. And yet, what's going on below remains blithe, banal, and superficial. The lower story is as trite as the upper story is profound. Those below on the ground hearing Jesus' cry of dereliction, they don't really hear it at all. They think Jesus is praying to Elijah for help. Whether they're just being cruel, they're continuing to be cruel, or whether they're now just curious, whatever it is, they don't get what is going on right in front of their eyes. Those on the lower level are completely unaware of this amazing, profound, painful drama playing out right in front of them. The suffering of the world, indeed their own suffering, their own death. All of this is being addressed on this upper level. But all they saw was some delusional wannabe prophet crying out to Elijah in some sort of death delirium utterance. Finally, a centurion says, "Truly, this man was God's son." Has someone on the lower level finally come to the realization of what has happened on the upper level? Perhaps. Perhaps, but I believe that it probably suits the scene more to read the centurion's words ironically, that he speaks in the same voice as everybody else around the cross. Really, this guy was God's son, for sure. Mockery, banality continues. So this story shows us two levels of existence. One level gives voice to human suffering and injustice, and another level that is as shallow as a puddle on the side of the road. I believe we have both levels moving in parallel in our own lives and in our own communities. Often we live on the lower level. Often we too live banal existences. We too can get carried away in the game of mockery as we pour contempt upon those who are less fortunate than ourselves. The challenge of this story, this ever so familiar story, is to learn to listen to the upper level that's happening in it, and also to listen to the upper level that's happening in your own lives. The challenge is to acknowledge suffering, death in our own life, in our families, those we know, in the world as a whole, without sliding back into making it a big cosmic joke, some sort of mockery. I once was told we can only sympathize with other people's experience of desolation to the exact degree that we've let ourselves experience desolation. I'm going to say that again. We can only sympathize with someone else's experience of desolation to the exact degree that we have let ourselves experience desolation. And some of us desire to remain on the lower level because it avoids experiencing this desolation. It avoids the upper level altogether, and that's perhaps more comfortable. But this story is a challenge to let us look and embrace, really see the desolation happening on the upper level at the time of Jesus and in our own lives and in our own time. Let us see the upper level story playing out on the streets of Vancouver and on the streets of Sechelt. Let us see this upper level tragedy playing out in the streets of Gaza, in the cities of Ukraine, in the unmarked graves of children of residential schools. Because it's only when we let ourselves know the darkness of death that we can ever come to know the light of resurrection.